Welcome to India Global Forum, uniting the world's most visionary minds from India and beyond to shape the future. Hear from and engage with the most influential policymakers, business leaders, and technology disruptors. Get involved with our key initiatives and join us at our world-class flagship events in the UK, the UAE, and India. Join India Global Forum, a gateway to the limitless potential of India's growth story and a catalyst for global connection. Log on to www.indiaglobalforum.com and join the conversation.
Hey everyone.
You will be asking questions and I will be answering you. Is that the way?
We invited some high net worth individuals
Hi.
to know their thoughts on wealth management.
Yeah, perfect.
I don't just want to see my net worth grow. At the end of the day, my investments have to add value to my life.
I believe in making innovative investments, leveraging every opportunity in the market.
It's one thing to create wealth. It's another to sustain it over a long period of time.
My family business making its mark across the globe. That's my singular goal for the future.
For me, it's important to leave a lasting legacy. Something that can nourish my kids, grandkids, and of course, great-grandkids.
I need a solution that has all my financial assets and resources working together in a single comprehensive plan.
With the rapid growth, my financial landscape has evolved dramatically. This requires someone with in-depth knowledge to help me navigate my finances.
Now, sustaining what you have built with your hard work, that's exactly a challenge for my financial advisor.
I need someone who understands the intricacies and the complexities of the global financial world.
My wealth has grown, and so has my understanding of the responsibility that comes with it. I find it important to have someone by my side who can share that responsibility with me.
Nuvama Private's tailor-made, personalized approach assures that my wealth is aligned with my specific objectives.
I know that my money is being put to the best use possible.
Nuvama Private manages the finance with the same unwavering commitment to the vision that I have set for my business.
They listen carefully, understand, and help in craft that perfect future that you have imagined for yourself.
With Nuvama Private, I found a sense of reliability.
Did you know the Emirates flight you just took would have consumed up to 50% more fuel just a couple of decades ago? Ask why? Did we do something to the engine? Not really. Look closer. It's the material. High-strength composites. Know which other industry needs it? Automobiles. Using composites as building blocks, we can save up to 50% more battery and still get the same performance. Introducing Planet Electric, where materials transform mobility.
Welcome to a new way of thinking, to a new approach to well-being, happiness, and health, to a combination that can't be found anywhere else. One where mind, body, and soul work in harmony with place. Hospital and hotel, resort and spa, retreat and rehabilitation, experiences and treatments, ideas and possibilities, unique, meaningful, and memorable. Welcome to a new harmony between how you feel and where you are. And welcome to a new philosophy, clinical wellness. Welcome to Tula.
can a bank help the world realize its dreams? At Emirates NBD, we empower people, companies, economies, countries. Proudly born in the UAE, leading the region, expanding globally. Investing, innovating, delivering, giving back, paying forward, creating opportunities to prosper. Emirates NBD.
From here, possibilities are everywhere. From taking first steps here, to beginning your own wealth journey here. From backing global trade ambitions here, to delivering on that promise here. That's why we're here, in the world's most dynamic markets. A bank that connects potential to possibilities. So, where will you go from here?
Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon. Okay, I need a little bit more. Good afternoon. All right, there we go. Right, who's here for the first time today? Who's been here with us for the last few days? All right, nice work. Nice to see you all again. So, climate change has been called our generation's existential challenge. And of course, existential challenge means a threat to our very existence. Now, while that may focus the mind, it doesn't mean that the solutions are particularly simple, and nor does it mean that we can focus on climate change without recognizing that both the challenge and the solutions are woven into so many other issues. Can the world really reconcile economic growth with sustainability? Can technology provide the answer at a global scale? And how do we make the energy transition both swift and fair? With COP28 beginning here tomorrow, just down the road, our timing could not be better for this, our second Climate and Business Forum. So for the next hour and a half, the collective brain power of those folks here in the room is going to be put together to identify opportunities and climate transition pathways. We have just the right person to start us off, here to talk about the absolutely critical role of the business private sector in the net zero revolution. Please welcome the Chief Commercial Officer of RIM Sustainability, Vivek Aswani.
Oh, that's bright. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I want the best doctors to carry my coffin to demonstrate that in the face of death, even the best doctors in the world have no power to heal. I want the road to be covered with my treasure so that everybody sees that material wealth acquired on earth stays on earth. I want my hands to swing in the wind so that people understand that we come to this world empty-handed and we leave this world empty-handed after the most precious treasure of all is exhausted, and that is time. My name is Vivek Aswani, and I'm an entrepreneur fighting to give the generations I can't see the most important resource of all time. Pretty dramatic, right? Yeah, I wanted to grab your attention. For those that don't know, that was a quote by Alexander the Great, one of the greatest conquerors in the world. And he gathered his generals right before he was going to die and asked them to accomplish these wishes for him. It's amazing how the humility can happen when time is short and the end is near. Well, that's where we are with climate change and the big buzzword around it, net zero. So let me paint the picture for you. 300 parts per million. That is the target level of carbon dioxide we need in the atmosphere. Where are we today? 417 parts per million, and we're growing at a rate faster than the entire history of this planet. We annually emit over 37 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. We need to halve our global emissions in the next 7 years, and we need to completely get to net zero by 2050. So let's summarize. 300 parts per million, reduce emissions by 50% in 2030, and get to net zero by 2050. Where are we at? In 2022, this may surprise some of you, the only country that is on target to reach its net zero targets is China. Everyone else is falling short. The UK just reneged and pushed back some of their green initiatives. I'll give you an example in developing countries. I grew up in Nigeria. I moved to Nigeria in 1991. We had an installed capacity of 5,000 megawatts that the government provided into the grid. 32 years later, the amount of available capacity in the country, 4,700 megawatts. We've actually lost available capacity in the grid in our country. And what did that force private sector to do? Generate their own power. How? Diesel generators. In Nigeria, we have 50 gigawatts of installed capacity on diesel generation. The question I ask is the public sector really giving us confidence on their strategies to help us reach these goals? In my view, it's the private sector that holds the key to transformative change. I, like many of you, have witnessed the impact of climate change on our world, and I have chosen to redirect my efforts towards sustainability because I believe that businesses can be a force for positive change. Let's start with measurement. The famous saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. How many of you in the audience who run businesses, work for organizations, have done a carbon reporting exercise or understand your carbon emissions? Yeah, I see a few hands out here. That's great, first of all, thank you. But BCG estimates that only 10% of companies have actually done a full comprehensive CO2 reporting. Now imagine you're trying to lose some weight and you have a target weight to reach. Now, how do you get to that weight if you don't know what your weight is today? You don't know how much to exercise, you don't know how much to burn, you don't know how much to lose, what diets to have. You can't start somewhere, you can't reach somewhere unless you know where you're starting from. And that's where the big problem started. So this is where I'm choosing to spend my time. I made the decision to leave a comfort of a family business and build a solution-driven business to tackle these issues. Not only did I see commercial value of engaging and prioritizing sustainability, but I also felt it on a personal level. I'm an active scuba diver. I've been scuba diving for the last 15 years. I have a big passion for it. I enjoy it. And on some of the sites that I had visited to, over a 5 or 10 year period, I saw in my own eyes the depletion of those coral reefs. I saw reefs that were teeming with life now have completely deserted, sort of deserts in the sea. The impact of global climate crisis is having intrinsic impact, not just in businesses, but in everyday life. And the problem with human nature may be that we only act once it's a bit too late. So the key question becomes, how do we navigate this journey to obtain clear metrics? This is where we believe technology and solutions become indispensable. In my entrepreneurial journey, I've witnessed the transformative power of technology in measuring sustainability metrics and emissions, and how this plays an instrumental role in the success of a business. The ideology of RIM sustainability is to democratize sustainability and empower all organizations to be able to make change and drive impact. We marry sustainability expertise with big data, with AI, and with technology, and our solutions can provide the transparency and accuracy needed for businesses to make informed decisions, aligning their operations with the imperative of achieving net zero. One of our core beliefs at RIM Sustainability is that by using technology, we can lower the cost and also increase the transparency for organizations to achieve these goals. Through this process of helping organizations around the world, I've actually come to see a plethora of opportunities for the private sector. First, the internal benefits to the business. Renewable energy is now competitive. You can generate power using solar at a very competitive price to what you would use in fossil fuels. That price is continuing to come down. I've seen electric vehicles become much more apparent within distribution strategies. So in markets like Vietnam, we've seen electric vehicle scooters increase from 2 to 10% without government intervention, because it just makes sense, because the operational cost of electric vehicles is lower than your internal combustion engines. Net zero is also something consumers are looking for. Sustainable businesses are also consumer-driven. Brands are now engaging with their consumers to talk about their sustainability initiatives, and increasingly consumers are more aware and demanding companies to become more sustainable. Then there are sectorial shifts that we need to look at. One is in food and food security. If we continue with the amount of meat that we're consuming today, we will never reach our our climate goals. We need to reduce the meat drastically consumption. What's the alternative? Alternative proteins. That's a $1 trillion opportunity to the private sector by 2050, right? And it needs to be there. So that $1 trillion needs to come out. Electrification of homes and offices. In countries like Nigeria, we're seeing the development of solar panels to electrify homes. And we're skipping generations of using grid where people are generating their own electricity using renewable energies where radiation is strong. Sustainable transportation. I mean, the richest man in the world made his wealth on electric vehicles. That should be enough to motivate most of us here in the room in the private sector to start adopting these net zero strategies and start adopting sustainable businesses. The list goes on, and I can continue. But critically, we must move beyond the rhetoric and embrace tangible actions. Sustainability and net zero is no longer an option. It is a necessity for the survival and prosperity of our planet. As entrepreneurs, leaders, let us seize this opportunity to drive positive change, not just for our businesses, but for the world we share. Whether you like it or not, if you are in the private sector, you need to become a leader in net zero and climate change. And the impact of this problem in your business and day-to-day life is inevitable. Together, we can make the net zero revolution a reality and give the most important resource and treasure to the next generation: time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivek, for reminding us about time and that leadership is such an essential ingredient of progress. What a spot-on introduction to our next panel, which will grapple with one of the absolutely core questions in the energy transition. Think about that word, transition. Going from here, one thing, to another over time. But over how much time? Should the pace of change be even, or should it accelerate? And what are we asking is the role of fossil fuels, and in particular, oil, in a low-carbon world? So to guide this discussion that we absolutely must have right now, here is Vikram Chandra. Welcome.
Katie, thank you so much once again. Well, it's great to be here, and what better place to talk about the transition, because we're here in the Middle East, of course, we are here in the UAE. This is an entire region which has been built partly by fossil fuel, oil, gas, that's driven the economy for a long time. But as you look around this entire region, you're seeing the increasing realization and an increasing desire to move beyond fossil fuel, the transition that was just being spoken about. So how will that transition be built? What are the options? How can partnerships be built, including with India? That's what the subject of our next session is going to be. So let me welcome onto the stage Fazil Abdul Rahman, who's the Group Vice President, Sustainability and Climate Change at Dhaka. Please do come and join us. A utility doing fantastic work in generation, in transmission, distribution. How do you make the transition is something, please grab a seat, is something we look at. And it's a great privilege to call onto the stage Mamta Verma, IAS, who's the Principal Secretary, Energy and Petrochemicals at the Government of Gujarat in India. And clearly, Gujarat, a state that has played a very important role in the entire petrochemical sector. Also, some of India's largest refineries are there, and how are you handling the transition is something we'll also take a look at. But Mr. Rahman, if I can just start with you. Across the Middle East, whether it's not just the UAE, when you look at other countries, Saudi Arabia, other places, there's this increasing signal that there is a realization that the era of fossil fuels is limited, is coming to an end, not because the oil is running out, but because the planet is asking for greater sustainability, and other solutions will have to be found. And there seems to be a realization that just as the Middle East led the entire world in the fossil fuel era, there's a desire that you would like to lead in the next era as well.
Definitely. I think they see it as a risk. Of course, oil has been driving and still driving quite a lot, the backbone of the economy. but the countries here doesn't want to stick to one option of generating the income. So that's a realization which they have. And if you see recently, especially in the last decade, there's a lot of emphasis on diversification of the economy. Whether it is on the tourism front, whether it is on other sectors or infrastructure sector, there's a big focus. And in fact, what is actually driving as an IN is the money which is generated from the oil and gas sector. I think the mentality or the realization is that, yes, globally, the demand of oil and gas will come down. The region expect to play still a larger share of that, still, mainly because just the sheer low cost of producing that oil and gas and sheer low intensity of production. But they do realize that from a medium to long term, that's not where they have to be, and they have to venture into other sectors. So that's why you see whether in utility sector, manufacturing sector, there's a lot of dependence moving away from oil to gas and then more and more towards renewables and nuclear. In fact, even from a TAQA perspective, last year we took a leading stake alongside Abu Dhabi National Oil Company in a company known as Masdar, which has renewable energy globally. Again, the driver for companies as in utility and in oil and gas like ADNOC is make sure we have our foot ahead in terms of investing in renewables, not just here, but globally. So yeah, there is a clear realization that they have to diversify.
Right. Baptaji, from your point of view, this entire concept of a transition, is this something that a state like Gujarat, for example, would have very high on its mind? And also, many of the companies, as I was saying, one of the largest refineries, Jamnagar, is in Gujarat. There are petrochemical industries out there. There's large ports out there. Is that what the feedback you're getting from others also? That there's a finite time, but we better start managing the transition?
Yeah, actually, these days everyone is talking about energy transition, but from the state perspective, if I have to say, that we have taken it very seriously, and our Honorable Prime Minister Sir has given the vision of Panchamrit, and India has to become net zero by 2070, and 500 gigawatt has to be, added in the entire capacity by 2030. So to achieve those numbers, it's also very important for the state to have good policies, and also to act, so that we are aligned with the government of India's, target. And at the same time, our manufacturing, because Gujarat is a highly industrialized state. We have, we have the largest refinery in Jamnagar. We also have 2 other refineries. So what is now happening in our state is that in the manufacturing sector also, the industries have started realizing it, and they have realized that definitely they are going beyond oil and gas. And so a lot of focus is there on green hydrogen now. Of course, it will go first because we are in our state, we have good presence of refineries, fertilizers company, and the other where hydrogen is used. So as a state, we are basically now, being positioned where the largest production of hydrogen is going to happen. So the companies are basically, we have come out with a land policy. The companies are already in the final stages of, deciding on their, projects. And now they are looking at hydrogen as definitely as one of the options, and other options, which in our state is quite high, is the renewables. So for solar and wind, we already have in the entire country, we contribute to about 15% of the renewable energy is being contributed by our state. And in the solar and in the wind, we have about 12 gigawatt. And we are now looking at offshore wind also. So I think through this, it's important that we continue this journey. And we are very sure, as a state, we are very sure that we will be achieving this 50% of our energy is from the renewables by, much before, 2030 also. By 2028, 29, we will be achieving that target.
You said 50%.
50% of our energy.
50% of the usage in one of India's most industrialized states.
Yes.
You're saying would be from renewables.
Yes.
And would that be largely a bet on green hydrogen or the other?
No, it will be largely from the solar, wind, and hybrid projects. Solar, wind, hybrid, and offshore wind.
Okay, that's actually an interesting number and an encouraging number. When we were talking about the transition, I think one of the first questions that I'm sure people are going to be asking, including this week right here in the UAE at COP28, the question of time. How much time is this transition going to actually take? Because climate activists and others will say, we've already run out of time. We're 2% is more or less there. We need to move faster. The industrial world needs to move faster. Is there a sense of a clicking time and the sort of timeline you think people have to make this transition by?
Definitely. I think people have been conveniently talking the word transition, but the question is when exactly and how fast enough, right? I think.
And is there going to be a cliff at some point? We're saying, okay, enough transition, you're going to have a particular defined date by which you've got to start meeting these deadlines.
Definitely. I mean, see, we as a corporate, we see a lot of pressure on the ESG agenda from our fixed income investors. I mean, although we are 98% owned by Sovereign Wealth Fund, Abu Dhabi holding company, a lot of investments come from the bond investors. You name the BlackRock, AXA, 50 plus bond investors globally. Now, what was one question to our CFO in the finance calls on ESG as a namesake question a couple of years back? Now 70 or 80% questions are dominated on this one because there are much more stringent requirements on them before they invest money into, say, fossil fuel projects or coal projects. They are looking at the ESG ratings of the companies, right? So that is actually pushing the corporates to make sure when they do the financial planning and capital allocation, they integrate ESG into the mix. I think that clearly, as you said, the need in the upcoming COPs is actually to have short and medium-term targets. I mean, of course, to 2050 and 2070, there is a convenient thinking that, okay, let's do everything maybe after 2040. But the fact is, the more and more greenhouse gases which you have in the air, the impact is already there. So it's high time we have to go for the target setting, bring it back and accelerate it. I think echoing what you said, ma'am, what we did as a company was we recently updated our 2030 targets. Initially, we had an ambition of 30% renewables by 2030. What we did, because of our acquisition of Masdar, we increased that to 65% by 2030. Yes, we know it is a stretch, but the fact is, unless we put that big numbers up front, the commitment won't be there, especially from an investment perspective.
So that's interesting. I mean, here is a utility in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, and you're saying 65% from renewables
globally across the portfolio. Yeah, exactly.
Or globally across the portfolio of all the things that you're doing. Right. If I could, for a country like India, of course, and India is meeting those climate targets, one of the few countries that actually is. There's also an economic imperative because at the end of the day, India doesn't produce that much fossil fuel. It's importing the fossil fuel. So the extent to which India can move to wind or solar, it's a net good. When you're talking to people, not just in Gujarat, but to other colleagues, which are the areas where you think India can have a major advantage and be able to scale really fast in renewables? Would it be wind? Would it be solar? Would it be green hydrogen, which we're hearing so much about?
So I would say that all three, but it also depends on the opportunities and also the kind of strength you have there. For example, solar is like India, everywhere solar can happen. Wind can happen only in few states. For example, Gujarat is a very high potential in wind. Tamil Nadu is having. And then offshore will also be, restricted to some, location. So, and even in green hydrogen, the states which are having the ports will have a major advantage. For example, Gujarat, we have almost 40% of India's cargo is being handled by our port. And in terms of the gas, LNG, almost 82% of LNG, is being handled by our ports, in Gujarat. So I think green hydrogen, that is why Gujarat becomes a very strong state in terms of having green hydrogen production, because it is also very near with the port. It can also be, exported well and transported well. So that is why I feel that, but in terms of having, all the states, they are in a different stage of, progress or development. And for some state, it is probably, in some state, maybe hydro potential is more. For our state, we are looking at more, on both. And now, plain vanilla solar and wind, we are not promoting. We are promoting more of hybrid, because you can get more CUF out of there also, and it can also meet the peaking power requirement also. And just to give you one example, like as a state, we had, from the beginning, we had this vision, where we went for a very good, mix of energy mix we went. We have thermal energy also, we have solar, wind, we have gas also, and gas has played a very major role in meeting our peaking power requirement. So that's how I think as in India, because we are the 4th largest in terms of renewables now in the entire world, and I am sure that the India is going to play a major role in enhancing, or addition of renewable capacity is there, and definitely in green hydrogen, yeah.
So, there's traditionally been a system, the grid is now improving and the grid is starting to become much better. Traditionally, what used to happen was a lot of the coal would be produced in eastern parts of the country and then literally transported on trains to other places where power generation would happen. Do you see that starting to change, where states like Gujarat, for example, can start producing more of their electricity directly and then just directly wiring it across?
So actually, it also depends what kind of a strategy you develop. Like, for example, in our state, we also get some coal from the eastern side, or eastern coast. But at the same time, we also have a lot of imported coal-based plants, where we get through our ports, we get imported coal. But at the same time, it's very important, to now go for the decentralized solar or wind generation, which basically manages your grid well. And it also, it's very effective in terms of having no transmission losses also. So those decentralized solar or the wind, generation is very important. Then you also need to have good big parcels where big projects can also come. For example, in Gujarat, we are doing the world's largest hybrid power project, both wind and solar. It's 30 gigawatt in the India and Pakistan border. So this kind of a big parks also are very important. At the same time, decentralized generation is also important. So I think it has to be a mix of all. And then only we will be able to meet the demand, especially, and one of the major challenges is basically to ensure grid stability. Because with the intermittency of this power generation and it is injection in the grid, it is very important to maintain the reliability of power. So all these, strategies are...
And especially if a larger component is solar, because solar, you don't get solar generation at night, there could be cloudy days, and so therefore the fluctuation actually builds up. I just wanted to get your sense of how Dhaka and the UAE and the Middle East in general looking at India, this entire concept of the IMEC that we've been hearing so much about in the last few months is really the closer integration of India with the UAE and other countries in the Middle East. Nothing new, by the way, that integration dates back centuries, if not millennia. But from your point of view, as you're looking at generation, as you're looking at transmission and distribution, I'm sure you must be keeping as a factor that, look, here is the most populous country in the world, not that far away, and possibly those connections can be done with India, which then enables a lot of that generation to continue to happen here and be shipped across.
Yeah, not just the most populous country, one of the most growing countries, so the potential is high. If you look at the UAE-India trade numbers, it's accelerating. It's not just increasing.
And that strategic relationship between the UAE and India only seems to be getting stronger,
Yeah. I think when we talk about energy transition, I think there's always emphasis naturally on generation. But as they say, there is no transition without transmission, right? I think that's an area where there needs to be a lot of investments. You did mention when it comes to system integration, the variability. I think something we as a company have been piloting successfully and expanding it bigger is actually connecting various systems. So in UAE especially, a big part of the net zero target is there's a lot of captive plants in the manufacturing sectors, be it oil and gas, steel and aluminum, who produce their own electricity. But one of the plans is actually connect them to the grid and give them the benefit of the nuclear and more solar in the grid, something which we're successfully doing with ADNOC. And early this year, we announced a similar strategy together with investments with a company known as Xlinks in UK. The idea being one of our countries of operation, Morocco. It's a long-term project, but we definitely see that as a way forward. We built 10 gigawatt of renewables in Morocco, and then we have one of the world's largest interconnection projects to the UK. So the benefit is energy security issues, especially in the Europe, it is being tackled. Second is the variability with different time zones can be solved to an extent. So there's a lot of potential, I believe, say between UAE and India with the distance and a lot of reserves in the system. Just like how you mentioned connecting the east versus west of India, just another connection from here could do wonders,
I was just in fact thinking about that. So if you can connect Morocco and the UK with the HVDC line and sort of pipe the electricity there, it's probably a shorter distance from the UAE to India if you put a HVDC line this way.
Ideally, you should believe so. And I think with the Middle East and India, I think one thing to keep in mind is the growing demand. So it's actually one way of solving the problem and sharing whatever you have, the spare generation or the variable generation effectively. That's something to be definitely explored for.
Well, Mamta ji, if either those pipes are coming or that cable is coming, it'll probably be landing in Gujarat.
No, I'm offering you. You come and invest in Gujarat.
Sure.
You produce, energy there, and and there you will not even get solar. You will get both solar, wind and offshore also. Come and invest over there.
There's definitely
We've got 3 more minutes in this session. After that, we can sit outside and finalize all the details of this particular project. Immediately after that. Just looking, at the challenges in the transition. What, to your mind, are the biggest challenges that you are seeing? Why aren't we moving faster? I mean, that's a question that a lot of climate activists are going to be asking. Why is the transition not happening faster?
I think one is the legacy assets this part of the world, and of course India have, right? I mean, there was a stage where we're building up natural gas assets and oil and gas assets, so that is one. I think second is when it comes to the system integration issues, that's really a challenge. You talk about solar, the levelized cost of electricity, but end of the day, there are a lot of the way you're going electricity one side is changing, so there's a lot of integration challenges. Third is mindset. I think people think decarbonization more of a threat. I think that has always been and still an issue in terms of seeing that as an opportunity rather than as a threat. Fourth is financing. There are still a good number of section of investors who still are much more focused, mainly because of a short-term return focus on the fossil fuel assets than on the renewable assets, right? So it's a combination of all 4 aspects which I mentioned for me. There have been progress, but again, I think it goes back to the same point that progress needs to be accelerated on all the fronts.
Right. Hamtaji, what would be the challenges according to you? I mean, I know in India there was a long period where we felt, and I think correctly so, that it's not our fault all that's happening with emissions. It is the developed world which has done it, and therefore the developed world should pay in common and differentiated responsibilities. Now I think there's the greater sense that we should do it in any case for our own sake, not and for the planet's sake, whether the West is doing it or not. But what, to your mind, are the major challenges in this?
So in terms of, I'll split into 2. In terms of, renewables, I would say the challenge is now that sense is there is a vision also and people want to do it. But the challenge is more on the ground level, we need to basically sensitize the local people, and in the transmission, energy evacuation system, in the transmission line also. So that is a major challenge. And in terms from the utilitarian point of view, I feel the grid stability is also a challenge. We need to have more technology, more innovation, more, capacity, in terms of know-how to how to manage your grid, because after all, with intermittent energy, that is definitely a challenge, We need to have good policies, where, and at the same time, good framework for everyone to come and operate. And in terms of gas, I would say that, from the industry point of view, now with so much of, everyone wants to export, for the export readiness, it's very important for them to have, that green tag. So, for example, Morbi, which is the largest ceramic cluster of the world, I would say, earlier, many years back, they were just running on fossil fuel. Now, the entire industry has switched to cleaner, to gas-based, plants are there. So I think that's happening. Maybe the pace needs to be accelerated more in the industry, but that realization is there. Definitely the challenges are more investment tie-ups and the good framework where everyone can operate. I think these are some of the things in which, but everyone is working together. And the good thing is that hope is there, and the good thing is that we are all talking and moving in the right direction. Yeah.
All right. Well, Mamta Vermaji, Mr. Rahman, thank you both so much for being with us. And that's all we have time for on this session, but we certainly hope these conversations go forward and we can jointly find solutions and partnerships that will help solve some of the issues around the transition. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment and hand it back to Edie. Edie.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. There you are. So we're going to turn the lens now and look at the climate transition from another perspective, and that is from the viewpoint of the billions of people who will be ravaged by rising seas and storms if we do not get this right. Our next guest has been warning of the dangers to smaller nations and coastal communities if we don't address climate change. She's a diplomat, a negotiator, and speaks with great experience and moral authority. So, welcome to the Secretary General of the British Commonwealth, Baroness of Ashtal, the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland. How are you?
Oh, no, I'm really well. I'm delighted to be here in Dubai with people who are going to help me change the world and save the planet.
All right, that's laying down the gauntlet. So I want to take you back to the early in the Commonwealth's history. 1989, Langkawi Declaration. The Commonwealth warned, and I'm going to read it here, the greenhouse effect, 1989, which may lead to severe climatic changes that could include floods, drought, and rising sea levels. And here we are 25 years later. How does it make you feel to hear those words?
I think it makes me feel incredibly sad, but very determined. Because, as many of you know, the Commonwealth is made up of 56 countries. That's 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30. But the most important reason why I think the Commonwealth has been so exercised about this existential threat which the climate crisis poses is because 33 of those are small states, 25 are small island developing states, and most of the countries in the global south have been those most acutely affected by climate change. So what happened in 1989 is the small states, many of whom were literally drowning, either in rising sea levels and or in the debt, which has been coming as a result of climate change, got together with the other larger countries and said, look, we have to do something, because if we don't do something, some of us within this family, we're not going to be here anymore. And so 2 years before 1989, they said, we need to get the evidence. There has to be evidence upon which we can base this. And they basically put together the first IPCC report, which then went to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Langkawi, in Malaysia, and the Commonwealth then did the Langkawi Declaration. And I'd invite all of you to read it, because actually it's heartbreaking. Everything that we have seen in the last 25, 30 years, they predicted. And that means, in real terms, we have seen death and destruction and harm, and it's real. And one of the reasons why we are so determined to be the difference we need to make now is because if we don't stop this, if we don't hold to the 1.5, there will not just be individuals who will no longer be here, many of our countries won't be here either. And so, you know, you've heard the slogan, and people think it's a slogan, 1.5 to stay alive.
I remember that from Paris.
It's not a slogan. It's a lived reality for the 25 small states and most of the other developing states in our world. So we are absolutely determined and no longer just saddened.
So how do we make sure that this COP is not a cop-out?
I think what we have to do is what we're actually doing. Because remember that we've been through a period where people said, I'm looking back to 2016 when I became Secretary General, and you'll know that many businesses weren't at COP then. And business wasn't an integral part of the solution. That's changed. We now know that countries on their own are not going to be able to deliver that which we need. We need the economic muscle and power of business to come with us. And we also know that the future is green and it's blue. And we've just about got to the economic tipping point where we are relatively confident that green energy is cheaper, going to be easier and better in the longer term. And now the economics are pointing in the right direction. Solar energy is 80% cheaper. Most of the other green energy sources are 40% cheaper. We know we have not yet properly, within 1% of our energy is coming from geothermal. Huge capacity. I know we've probably got some Kenyans in here, but Kenya now has 96% of her energy coming from green energy sources, and 47% of that is geothermal. But it used to be so expensive to get geothermal out. Now it is really cheap. With a 5 million investment, you can probably do the extraction. So the whole game has changed.
The message seems to be, coming into this climate summit, we are making progress, but the progress is not fast enough. And for some message, that seems sort of reassuring, but I wonder how that message feels when you're standing on the beaches of your native Dominica. In 2017, Hurricane Maria, one single storm, led to losses of over 200% of GDP. Yep. Almost 95% of the island's buildings were destroyed. So talk to me about the aftermath of that hurricane and what that means in terms of rebuilding.
Well, I think the Prime Minister, when he came to the UNGA immediately after Hurricane Maria had destroyed, as you said, 226% of our GDP, he said, I've just come from the front line of the war on climate, because I visited my country on the first plane that was available, and it looked like Armageddon. Dominica is incredibly lush and green and is called the nature island of the Caribbean. It's beautiful. When I arrived, the whole country was brown. Even the bark had been stripped from the trees, and there was not a leaf to be seen. But it wasn't just the economic and physical devastation. What was really heartbreaking was what it did to the people. We only have about 70,000 people. And so often they talk about climate change in terms of money and physical structure. They don't actually talk about the human element. And I'll never forget, there was a woman in Roseau, which is the capital. She'd had 2 children, but she had a son, aged 3. And the hurricane was so terrible. She was trying to get her children from one point to another, and she was holding her 3-year-old's hand really, really tightly because she didn't want to lose him. And he kept on saying, Mummy, you're holding my hand too tight. It's too tight. And he pulled his hand away from hers, and the hurricane took him. And she never saw him again. And 3 years later, she was still walking around Roseau going, has anyone seen my son? Oh. Have you seen my son? And when I think of climate change, I say, yes, I see him. I see him, and I won't forget him, and we're going to make sure that there aren't other mothers and fathers who will have to say to us, have you seen my son? Because we will have seen him, and we would have fixed this. So when you're thinking about climate change, just I think all of us need to understand is deeply personal. This is not some esoteric academic exercise. This is people's lives, their livelihoods, and their countries. When someone tells you your island is no more, and the graveyards of your parents are at the bottom of the sea, and you've lost your culture, your music, your language, and your people, these things are irreplaceable. That is what existential means. Not a word. It's a reality.
And so when we think about those incredible, horrific stories, and then translate that into the years afterwards in terms of the rebuilding and the money that it takes to rebuild, and the indebtedness that Dominica as a country finds itself in, talk about that cycle, that vicious cycle that it's almost impossible to get out of.
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen from the countries who've suffered in this way is the amazing resilience. The fact that they've come back from that they've rebuilt their countries and they're rebuilding and they're trying to build back better. So, for example, Dominica is saying it wants to not only be the nature island in the world, but it wants to be a living lab, that it wants to be the most resilient country in the universe. But how do you do that? Because we then talk about debt. In 2016, when I started on this journey, I remember it was really interesting. People were saying that there was no real correlation between the debt incurred as a result of the climatic incident and the debt the country had. And it took years for people to get the empirical data to say, no, there is a direct correlation. And why is that? When a hurricane or a cyclone comes and hits the country and it removes the bridges, the roads, the schools, the hospitals and destroys that infrastructure, regrettably, it doesn't take the debt with it. It leaves the debt behind. And when the country has to rebuild, they have to rebuild better. So the bridges have to be higher. So it goes the same distance, but you're probably going to pay twice as much. The houses and the buildings have to be more resilient. So they're going to cost you more. The roads are going to have to be reinforced. So you're probably going to pay twice the amount that you had invested before, plus you still have to pay the old debt and the new debt. And the kicker is this. If you are in a developing state which has been crushed by debt, you can't borrow half the money that others can borrow. And even if you can borrow, you're going to have to borrow at a rate 3 times higher. So you can never be competitive. And if you were so fortunate to be described either as a middle income or a high income country, you're going to get no overseas development aid. So you're going to have to go into the marketplace and compete and try and get the money to pay back. And that is just inequitable and unfair and unjust. And the days when, say, 1945, when we were looking at of how we arranged the system, it said this was all about fiscal rectitude. Yeah. If you had fiscal rectitude, you'd be able to manage your budgets and you'd be able to do this and you wouldn't need to do anything else. But what do we know now? We are faced by exogenous shocks which are out with our control. You don't control climate. And particularly if you're in a small state, you've contributed nothing to climate. Maybe the G20 countries have been responsible for 80%, but you haven't. Then you're hit by COVID, another exogenous shock. Then you are hit by the food crisis, which has come as a result of the Ukraine-Russia war, another exogenous shock, all out with your control. And this is the reality. And so a system which is predicated on dealing only with fiscal rectitude, which takes no cognizance of the exogenous shock to which countries, particularly the vulnerable countries, are now subject, is just not real in terms of 2023. And we have to have a fiscal approach to international finance which recognizes the reality of the world we now live in and doesn't hark back to a situation which might have been valid in 1945 but is no longer valid today.
And that system that was developed after 1945, some of the institutions are still around, right? So we've got the World Bank, we've got the IMF. They seem to be still somewhat relevant, but there's quite a few calls to reform those. And in particular, the Bridgetown Initiative by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, has gained some momentum in the last year. And, you know, to simplify, there's sort of three buckets of finance that need to come to nations. And the biggest one we've been talking about a lot here, we'll be talking about further this afternoon, is the climate, the energy transition. So to put solar panels, windmills, that kind of thing. Then there's another bucket, which is around, it won't make people money, but it will save them money. So it's things like your bridges, your seawalls, that kind of thing. And then there's another bucket of money, which is all about the loss and damage, the money that, as a small island nation with a GDP of 0.001% of the whole world's GDP, I didn't do this, right? So, and part of what the IMF and the World Bank or the role that they can play is doing things like absorbing some of the risk from currency investments. They can act as a push to push this money towards the right places. So I wonder what you think of the Bridgetown Initiative, whether it's got some legs, what we might see in this COP.
Well, I think it has got some legs, and you'll know that the Commonwealth came up with the Universal Vulnerability Index, very much to help to better manage the exogenous shocks about which I spoke and which this actually speaks to. The thing that I'm actually quite hopeful for, that when we went to the World Bank meeting in Morocco, the IMF and the World Bank and the other international financial institutions have themselves accepted that reform is necessary and that reform is urgent. And there was a commitment from a number of countries to fund the World Bank in a way that it would be able to better manage and better respond. And if you see the synergy now between the leadership of the World Bank and the leadership of the IMF, the fact that they're actually friends is not a good thing. And they are seeking to find a holistic, integrated response to this. But I think Bridgetown and what we're doing is like putting a pin on everybody's chair so they can't sit down until they fix this. Because we have to fix it. And what we know is none of us can fix this on our own. But if we come together, we can fix it. And I think what's really critical is us to remember that when COVID came and the world accepted that COVID presented an existential threat to us all, we responded, we acted, we came together, and we fought it. The threat that climate poses is actually an even greater threat. And what is really quite curious is why aren't we now responding with the same urgency, with the same rigor and the same vigor? I mean, I've been saying for quite a while, and I honestly believe this, if you look at where we are now, human genius got us into this mess. The effect of the Industrial Revolution wasn't understood when it happened, but we understand it now. And the consequences of that revolution is being felt, and the benefits, by all of us. And now human genius is going to have to get us out. And some of that human genius we're seeing in terms of the geospatial data that we now have, which enables us to better predict what's going to happen, to better respond. The fact that the satellites that we now have, that the Planet Lab has, and what Will Marshall is doing, and we're helping, gives us a possibility of having a real carbon market. So we will be able to understand how much every tree sequestrates. And instead of making a guesstimate, we'll have an accurate estimate, an accurate calculation, which then becomes something which can create a real carbon market. And that could be a game changer. The fact that we've got enzymes now which can eat plastic and help clean our oceans. So there are huge, brilliant innovations taking place, but it will take all our global genius focusing together on this to come up with the solutions that we need. And I think we can do it if we choose. What perplexes, depresses, and upsets me is when I see we're not choosing. And I think there is a real need for every single one of us who are in this room must be here because we are committed to being a solution. And what did Gandhi ji say? He said, you have to be the change you wish to see in the world. We can be that change, but we need to choose to be. And I don't think any of us can do this on our own, but I'm absolutely sure, without any doubt, that we can do it together.
Tell me about some of the things that the Commonwealth is doing in particular. You mentioned the Universal Vulnerability Index. Talk about that and how it protects those who need it the most.
Well, what the Universal Vulnerability Index does is it identifies the different areas of exogenous shock. And it's GDP plus, because it's not just about how much you are generating, it's taking into account the vulnerability that you have to climate shocks, to the other shocks, and it enables the figures to be recalibrated so that you are able to get assistance, overseas development aid and other sheltered assistance in a way that will make the reality of your position more bearable. And this is just one of the things that we are doing. The other thing we're doing is we're looking at financing, because many of our small states do not have the empirical data they need to be able to make applications successfully to the green and other funds, and therefore they were often making applications, spending millions of dollars, and then not being able to do it. So in 2016, when I became Secretary General, we created a Commonwealth Financial CFA, which is the Commonwealth Finance Access Hub, which is a center which works directly with the funds to better understand what they want, how they want it to be presented. And we've then put a climate finance advisor in our countries who've been able to assist our member states to make applications. And we've been given virtually no money to do this, to be frank. It's about $7.8 million is all we've had. We've put 19 advisors in. And so far, with that tiny amount of money, of 7.8, we have delivered $316 million into the hands of our member states, and we have $500 million in the pipeline. And that's just with 19. Can you imagine what we would do if we had 50 advisors? Because our advisors work like a pack. We try to make sure that every advisor has a slightly different discipline. So this one might be a biomimicry, circular economy, symbiotic oceanologist, etc. But together, we're trying to fill the full spectrum. And every application that's made for any country is reviewed by all the advisors. And then what we've done, because there is a whole question of absorptive capacity, we have trained more than 2,500 climate advisors throughout the Commonwealth. So we're not just making the applications, we're building capacity to enable the countries to make it for themselves. And that's really important for us to get the money in the right place. We've got the Commonwealth Charter, Blue Charter, which is dealing with our commitment on oceans. And it's tragic that only less than 1% of all the money going to Sustainable Development Goals is going to oceans. And yet the majority of our planet is blue. It's a no-brainer. It's absolutely bonkers. So we've done that, and just last year we agreed to create the Commonwealth Living Lands, which is enabling us to, with the 3 Rio Convention secretariats, are working together, and we want to implement those 3 Rio Conventions, and we're having action groups. We've created common sensing, which is using the geospatial data with UNITAR, UNISAT, the British Space Agency, ourselves, Planet, Catapult, a number of others, and we're using that geospatial data to better inform the applications we're making, but also to forewarn our countries about when climate disasters are on their way. And that early warning system means that we've been able to help our countries move millions and millions of people out of the way before disasters happen. So we're saving lives. And then we've got our CSET agenda, which is the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition. But there's lots more, and we've just launched our AI consortium. I was rather stunned to be appointed by Berkeley the 2023 Global Leader for Innovation. And so I went to Silicon Valley, and as my mother would say, who told them to do that? Because all these companies said they wanted to see me. Good move. And so what we've done, all of us, is we've come together and we are creating the AI Commonwealth Consortium, because what we know is that many of our small and developing states don't have the capacity to use AI. They don't have the big computers. So we're looking to see how we can create in the cloud a capacity which would assist them. And my last, which I did on Friday, and I won't tell you what we've just launched the Commonwealth Genius. Okay, so if anyone in this room thinks they have the capacity to be a Commonwealth genius, they can come and join us. But what it really represents is how we use geospatial data to be able to create concrete action in order to face climate change. And we are trying to pull together every expert we know, together with the space agencies, to try and fill those gaps in. So fantastic. I'm sure there's loads of genii in this room up there who would want to come and
Great. You don't sound like you sleep very much.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Goals for next year. Well, we've run out of time, but I'd like to give you a very enormous thank you, and let's give her a huge round of applause. Secretary General of the Commonwealth. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, wait, you can't leave before a picture. Wait 1 sec. I know. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you. So one very clear thought is emerging from these conversations today, that we need to pick up the pace of the climate transition. And to do that, we are going to need trillions of dollars. Let's call that the capital transition. Now, we've been having this conversation for more than a decade, since 1989, as we just heard. But just as accelerating the energy transition has become more urgent, so is accelerating the flow of capital. So we've got 4 people who know this conversation very well, and I'm going to bring them to the stage now. Please welcome the CEO of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Kate Hampton. Board member and head of financial services for the Africa Finance Corporation. You can sit just here if you like. We've got the board member and head of financial services, Africa Finance Corporation, Sanjeev Gupta. Welcome. And we also have the vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Deepali Khanna. How are you? How are you? Have a seat. Lovely to see you. Welcome. How are you guys?
Super.
Good. Excellent. Nice to see you. So it was 2009. We're going back in time during these panels. The rich world first agreed to bring $100 billion together in climate finance for developing countries to mitigate the devastating effects of climate change. Think of Dominica, which we just heard about. Think about floods in Pakistan, drought in the Sahel. 14 years on, rich countries have still yet to fill even this goal, inadequate as it is on its own. But we know that the conversation has moved on somewhat. Poorer countries need $2.4 trillion in investment or assistance every year to deal with the challenges of climate change. Mitigating climate change, preventing getting worse, resilience, adapting to the existing change in the climate, investing in clean energy technologies. So a lot of it is about getting the private sector to spend more money in the global south, unlocking some of the money in the IMF and the World Bank. Let's get to the specifics of where some of this money is going to come from. Kate, we'll start with you. You've been very involved in the climate finance discussions ahead of COP28. Lay out where the conversation is in terms of moving money to where we all agree it needs to go.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think the simplest way to explain the finance problem is by looking at the cost of capital that is faced by developing countries relative to advanced economies. Unless we bring that cost of capital down, countries and communities will find it difficult to invest in both climate mitigation but also in resilience, because a lot of green solutions have high upfront costs but are much, much cheaper in the long run. But then the cost of capital is really important, because dirty old energies tend to be quite cheap upfront, but then you're constantly paying and polluting as you go along. So one of the key challenges is to bring down the cost of capital. And that's happening at a time where there's a global debt crisis because of COVID, because of conflict, successive climate shocks, the increase in interest rates. So 3 billion people are now living in countries that are spending more on debt servicing than they are on health or education. So we are in a situation where the needs are very high. So Professors Stern and Songwei have said we probably need 2 trillion plus outside China in emerging economies. Much of that has to be mobilized outside those economies. But to get that to flow, we need stronger enabling environments. We need much more support for countries in terms of bringing down the cost of capital. And we also need to get the private sector to play its part. Instead of endlessly refinancing wind farms in Europe, that money needs to flow to the places that are really going to make the transition. But this has been a really exciting year, and this is my last point. Yeah. In terms of scene setting, we've seen Prime Minister Mia Mottley launch the Bridgetown Agenda. That's been picked up by President Macron. Then President Ruto of Kenya had that extraordinary summit in Africa. We've seen it be picked up by the G20. India's leadership has been crucial with the MDB expert group, really providing clear recommendations as to what to be done. So I think the agenda has been set. The solutions have actually come from the South, and now it's really a question of implementing. And the difficult thing for Dr. Sultan as president of the COP is that the COP doesn't have agency when it comes to all of the institutions that are needed. So heads of state, finance ministers, when they show up here over the next few days, they have to be leading, because they have to take this call not just through the COP, but into all of the international financial discussions around the world.
So, Deepali, we heard a little bit about India, the G20. Lay out from your perspective, coming from India, where you think the conversation is as we go into COP, and what you're looking for from discussions around climate finance.
Thank you so much, and it's such a privilege to be here. So, getting into COP, the discourse around climate finance is definitely critical, and it's at a very transformative stage from my perspective. It's a period that really characterizes both opportunities as well as challenges. And let me explain how and why. So the first thing is, one sees it as a challenge when you're really wearing a developing country hat, because you're looking at how growth is being impacted. Everything is getting exacerbated by the climate crisis, and marginalized communities are being greatly affected by all this. On the other side, we've come out of G20, which is quite historical, and to be able to get the consensus that we got. And I think, it wasn't symbolic. It was truly a transformational moment where you saw the leadership really committed towards climate. You've seen important themes that were part of the declaration.
What were those important themes?
So the themes were really around, of course, what Kate was mentioning. The financial reform was definitely there. There were pieces around the MDB reform again, which was really critical. There was the need to really reinvigorate the SDGs, which are really critical. And then, of course, really ensuring that we can kind of have all the climate finance which is needed to address the challenge. Now, where I'm seeing a lot more needs to be done is really around the commitments that have been made so far. So, when you're looking at developed countries, as Kate was saying, the $100 billion that need to be flowing, it's really the need of the hour. Developing countries need the resources, they need the capacity to be able to really absorb this finance, as well as get the finance for everything that they need to do. We also know that we're failing very significantly on the achievement of the SDGs. Only 12% of the SDG goals have been met. So I think there's really the need to kind of do a lot more in this space. We also have seen, through a recent study that we've done with BCG, that only 16% of the climate finance is being met. And even if we were to broaden the definition of transition finance, the needs really outweigh the flows by 66%. So there's a lot that needs to be done. Right. So to summarize, I'd really say that, the developed world really needs to rise to the occasion and make sure they provide the resources. The second piece is the developing world needs to be front and center of the conversation and how they're going to be using these resources effectively. And of course, the entire piece around the financial architecture and the reform of systems so that we have more climate finance available.
So, Sanjeev, you think quite deeply about how to get more investment to Africa through your work with the Africa Finance Corporation. What would you like to see coming from COP?
Yeah, firstly, obviously, it would be right for me to thank the IGF for having me here, but particularly more so because I'm getting a bit of a baptism into what it feels to be in a gender imbalanced panel. So,
we're very inclusive on this panel.
If you think I'm feeling intimidated, you will understand why I'm feeling intimidated. There is this old cliche that, you never get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate, right?
Right.
And in the African continent, as the eminent minister was saying earlier on, we all know that the global effects of climate, of geopolitics, of warfare, of bad monetary policy, bad banking, disproportionately affects the continent of Africa. So it's not meant to be an excuse, it's just that we are generally at the receiving end of a lot of issues that wasn't created by us. And for those of you who listen to Billy Joel, you will know the song that we didn't light the fire.
Right.
And we didn't light the fire, I promise you. In Africa, we produce less than 3% of the global emissions, but we are unduly and disproportionately affected. So our take, therefore, is not so much about what COP can give us, but what we can give COP instead, right? And let me explain that so that you don't think I'm getting ahead of myself. As an institution, we long back realized that if we are going to attract global capital into the continent, we have to be able to mobilize domestic capital first. And we have to be able to do that early stage project development and project preparation financing ourselves. And if we can do that, that old story of guilt, greed, and fear will come in, and it will come in to Africa. So we have been successful in developing a range of projects, not just in renewable energy, not just in climate-friendly projects, but keeping the development agenda of the African continent in mind. And we see that there is a solution, therefore. So if there is a plea, since your question was really directed at me as to what can I expect from COP, I think what I should expect from COP is a basic realization today that the problems that we are trying to grapple with in the world, be it energy security, be it food security, be it access to renewable energy sources, be it access to critical minerals so that you can build your wind turbines and build your renewable batteries, All those solutions lie on the continent of Africa. So what are you waiting for? The solution beckons. The opportunity is out there. So that's the only message I want to give to COP, that don't do it for me, do it for yourselves.
I mean, one of the initiatives that's come from the Bridgetown Initiative, which you mentioned, is around this idea of how do we reform the international institutions so that more money can come to finance the projects that already exist, that the knowledge is already there to build. And one of the interesting arguments I heard was around, if you want to move money in Europe, so that it doesn't go to a German wind farm, which we don't need any more of, but that does go to Africa, for example, is that you need to help those investors who are sitting in Europe manage that currency risk, right? Because they don't all understand all the risk that happens. And that could be a really good role for an institution that was managed by the IMF or the World Bank, to take on that currency risk so that if I, as a private investor, am coming in and I want to see a 9-10% return, but I have that eroded by currency risk, I don't see it. Do you see that development, Kate, is coming in terms of the conversation and how we're looking at that reform of the financial institutions and what else we might see?
So I think currency risk is crucial, and there are some innovations like TCX, which are aimed at dealing with that issue. I mean, just to give you some numbers, you know, Africa doesn't have too much debt, okay? It has an unfortunate structure of debt. Most of it's in foreign currency, most of it is high capital cost, and actually, you know, other countries have sustainable debt levels that are much, much higher, but a much bigger chunk of it's in local currency. So exactly what you're saying, deep local capital markets are crucial, but where you need international finance, dealing with currency risk is going to be absolutely essential. So I think if we can scale some of these innovations like TCX, and really it's only the MDBs that have the ability to scale those, we'll be able to move forward. But I don't want to overstate the role of MDBs.
Right.
National development banks, local capital markets are going to do the lion's share of the investing. MDBs are going to make it easier for resources to flow around the world, but they need to reform to do that job better.
So, Sanjay, what would you like to see, or what do you see in terms of the role of the local banks in encouraging this to happen?
Yeah, I think, you know, we keep talking about the word partnership and alliances, so much so that it's become a cliche which doesn't really therefore register anymore in terms of what we mean by that. And the reason I'm highlighting it is because, you know, it is a known fact that whether it's because of misplaced or confused agendas, or whether it is because of shorter term priorities, or whether it is just because there is a shortage of capital generally, that the world does not have enough allocation into the emerging markets to develop those regions, be it from a climate perspective or be it just from a human development perspective. So therefore, one has to get smarter here, right? And one of the things that I've always wondered about is that if you are going to tap into the trillions of dollars that is there in the private sector globally, private sector capital by definition is a bit like a Goldilocks, right? It doesn't like anything too hot or too cold.
Right.
It likes it just about warm. So what is it that state organizations, the Bretton Woods institutions, which incidentally in my view has singularly failed in its original mandate, there's no other way of putting it, right? But between those institutions, the G7, the G10, instead of trying to fund and assist and provide aid, and aid itself has a problem because aid tries to do too many things in one go, right? Why not create credit enhancements?
Yes.
Why not provide guarantees?
Yeah.
Why not provide first loss? Why not provide exchange risk protection so that private sector capital can come? And I love it not because that's a larger pool. I love it because that's a transparent way of getting things done. And that therefore will automatically mean that the sustenance of those investments is that much more profound.
I'll come back to you, Kate, on that. But Dipali, I wanted to know, you know, philanthropy has such an important role in unlocking capital flows. It can play can sort of spark to light the fire, if you like. I wonder if you could tell us some of the work that the Rockefeller Foundation is doing around that.
Yeah, so at the foundation, we've always believed and harnessed all the energy around catalyzing investment, addressing issues within the financial systems to really ensure more financing flows do take place. At the UN General Assembly in September this year, we've also made a big and bold announcement of putting in $1 billion over the next 5 years to really address the global climate transition issues. The two important pillars around that is, the first is we really want to, as Sanjeev, you were saying, really build coalitions and collaborations and be able to see how we leverage resources. And the other part is, how do we really make sure that countries, people, places that are affected are part of all the work that needs to get done. We're also looking at 4 important systems that are impacted by climate that really need to be attended to, and that's what we're trying to do through these investments, which are the food systems, health systems, energy systems, and most importantly, finance that we've been talking about. So I think, we're totally committed towards that. Some of the things that we've done at COP26, I think some of you must have heard around the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which for the first time, we were able to get 3 foundations to put in $500 million each and stand up this platform. It's been phenomenal to see. Right now, this platform is working across 20 countries. They made a very bold commitment of unlocking $100 billion from private and public sector entities over the next decade. The 3 important goals that they're pursuing, the first is really to ensure that 1 billion people get access to reliable and affordable energy. The second one is to reduce carbon emissions by 4 billion tons. And the third one is to create 150 million new green jobs. Again, we've been involved with the Bridgetown Initiative. We've been also part of the MDB Innovation Challenge Fund, where we were able to coalesce $5.25 million. That's really helping the MDBs to find innovative ways of how they can actually address some of the issues that we're talking about. We've also been working on reports which are really important and frameworks, like the Capital Adequacy Framework. We've also done a report more recently with the risk control, where we are seeing how the World Bank can really unlock $190 billion. So I think, from our perspective, we're trying to really do our very best, and we're really following a multifaceted approach where, yes, at the grassroots level, we are doing programmatic work to address climate issues. On the other side, we're working on the financial reform side. And the third important piece is really building up the coalitions, because climate finance is really an urgent need of the hour, and we're putting all our energy, our voice, our convening ability, and our resources behind it.
I want to just focus on one of those, Sanjeev, you mentioned you thought that the IMF and World Bank had really failed in delivering their mandate. Would you agree with that, Dipali?
I would say that with the current leadership at the bank, I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
And I think I was earlier with the MasterCard, so I know Mr. Banga.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the topic is around leadership, right?
Yeah.
And leadership does matter. So we are at an important moment. And just, in a couple of months that he's been around here, the things that he's been able to do, I am more optimistic. If you would have asked me the same question probably 6 months ago, I would have probably said what Sanjeev said.
Right.
Can I just come in there for a second? Because I think the important thing to recognize is that the Bretton Woods were set up in 1944, where most of the countries they're supposed to serve weren't independent. The world has fundamentally changed. They were designed for completely different problems: war, reconstruction, and balance of payments issues. We need completely different mandates and institutions now, and we need a global settlement where countries have fair shares of governance and influence, and that the system works for everyone. And I think there's a real loss of trust in the multilateral financial institutions, and I speak regularly to finance ministers from developing countries who tell me, we're now working with the private sector, with China, with Gulf countries. There's a much bigger array of capital at our disposal. We really need the MDBs to do the kinds of things that Sanjeev is talking about that the private sector can't do, because there's no shortage of capital out there.
Yeah.
They really need to focus on what is the new mandate. And so what I'm really hoping is that at this COP and through successive discussions, the Indians helped kick it off with their G20, Brazil is next. I think we really need to see a much better global deal around governance of these institutions that's fair, and they need to be effective, and they need to be fast, and they need to move at the speed of the problem. I think that's the issue. They were designed for a different time and a different job, and they seem still stuck a few decades away. But I think leadership matters. We're seeing progress, but without the major shareholders of those institutions, the G7 countries and others really leaning in, we're not going to see the reform. And I think actually the emergence of competitor institutions around the world is really, really positive. AIIB and others, African regional institutions are developing very rapidly. UAE and others are stepping in. I think that's really, really important to show what can be done and make sure that the MDBs are reserving that very particular role that they have to do the things that only they can do. And I think that's the challenge that we have, this big coordination challenge. And this is why fora like IGF are great, because you can get together with institutions, businesses, governments, civil society to have that whole of society conversation about how we change the system.
You convinced by that, Sanjeev?
No, I mean, look, looks like I've set a cat among the pigeons here. But, fundamentally, monopolies don't work. And the Bretton Woods Institution is a classic example of a monopoly. And as you correctly pointed out, it has a genesis in a very different era. It has a role to play. Nobody is, firstly, I'm not trying to malign them, and secondly, I'm not trying to dismiss them. But what you mentioned is so important, that one needs choices, right? And the good news for a large part of the global south, if I may create a universe of such people or such countries, is that we have choices. We are not only dependent on one narrative, one policy, and one agenda. And we do get into trouble because of that. I'll just share with you a little anecdote that very recently we took a $500 million loan from one of the greater powers of this world. And I got a call the next day from a very senior official of the other greater power of the world saying, "What have you done? We've been discussing such great things with you, and you go and take money from them."
This is China versus the US.
I didn't say that. And all I said is that I had the choice of taking money from 10 other powers, but so far, 9 of them have given me a textbook, and the 10th has given me a checkbook. Right. So I went with the checkbook for time being. Make sense? Because, see, we actually have on the African continent an existential crisis. We have 1.5 billion people with no jobs, 70% of the people below the age of 20, 1 billion people with no access to electricity. Healthcare is a big challenge. Climate change is felt by us, acutely felt by us, right? It's, as the minister was saying, it's not a rhetorical thing. So we don't have the luxury of getting stuck into geopolitics. There is a saying in Africa that when elephants fight, the grass suffers. We don't want to be the grass. We just want to do our own thing, manage our own affairs, and make sure we deliver on our mandate. Because that's how it is to be. And the good news, as I said, is that we have choices.
And can I just come back to something that was said earlier about thinking differently about developing countries? I think the aid narrative and the climate finance narrative has been very much a narrative of rich countries need to help poor countries. And it is true that rich countries hold the historic responsibility and they absolutely should meet their commitments and go beyond what's currently on the table. However, it is also true that all of the critical, well, not all, but a large share of the critical minerals that are needed for the green transition are sitting on the African continent. And actually, if we were to support green industrialization with large-scale capital flows on the continent to add value, create jobs for all of these wonderful young people, it would be transformative not just for Africa, but then we would green global supply chains and we would see ourselves much, much closer to the 1.5 goal that we have. So we need to start thinking about these things differently, and we need to bring together climate and development. Green industrialization on the continent of Africa makes sense for everyone. And that has to be one of our high priorities. So if the international financial system isn't delivering that, what's it for? Right? Let's focus on the purpose here.
Can I buy you a drink later?
There's some very excellent coconut juice outside.
Oh, it's very good.
I think we need something more potent.
All right, we've got only a minute left. Leave us with a message of hope. Give me an example of something that you think gives you hope that we will see the change that we need. Sanjeev. Yeah, go on. Give us some hope.
Well, obviously, there is no question in my mind that there is hope. There's no question in certainly the institution that I represent that there's enormous amount of optimism. The challenge we have is not about what we have to do. The challenge is about how quickly can we do it, right? The hope comes from the point that I think I made earlier, and and you made just now as well, and that is that the hope stems from a very simple fact that when it comes to the basic requirements around energy security, food security, access to critical minerals, access to new markets, simple thing, let me tell you. Today, the world's telling Africa, do not develop your gas resources. Do not develop your oil resources. The Ukraine war changed that narrative. However, the point we've been trying to make is, do you know that if we do not bring gas as a transition fuel to provide energy, firewood is the main source of energy, which means you're felling trees. How can that be right? Gas today is flared out of the continent. How can that be right? Marshal it, harness it. So coming back to your question of hope, I am hopeful because the facts are obvious. And surely people at the end of the day do revert back to a level of sanity, don't they? I mean, that's my hope.
Well, that's the hope. All right, I'll give you the last word, Deepali. What's your message of hope?
So I'm very hopeful because what I've seen at the G20, the kind of consensus, the Global South really leading the conversations and really putting forward what they really want and need is something that, one hadn't heard it before. And the kind of, it's been pretty historical, and I think it's not going to stop. It's going to just build more momentum. And, with the Global South taking charge, I'm very confident that marginalized communities, young people, indigenous communities, their plight is going to be front and center. Africa, again, what it wants is really going to be there, being driven by Africans as opposed to being told what needs to be done. So I'm very hopeful, and I think, there are many of us in this room that are very passionate. And again, going back, action starts with each one of us. I think we do have that critical mass now, and none of us, there's a sense of urgency. So, we are going to act.
All right. Thank you very much. We've run out of time, but Kate, Sanjeev, Deepali, thank you very much for joining us here at India Global Forum, the Climate and Business Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Oh, gotta have... All right. Thank you. Thank you. So we have established our big picture pretty clearly. To reach our climate goals, we need more investment, way more investment, and way more innovation. So we want to speak to some entrepreneurs, to some funders who are making that happen. First, to set the scene, very pleased now to welcome to the stage co-head of investment strategy at Leapfrog Investments. Please welcome Nakul Zaveri. How are you? Good. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So let's start, first of all, with defining, you're a climate investor.
That's correct.
Big words, think about sustainability, but define sustainability and climate investing for me.
Yeah, it's tricky. Whenever you ask a lot of people, when we're looking at sustainable companies and we ask them, what is sustainability? Sustainability is such a broad topic. But if you take the noise out, it's essentially the ability to endure, right? That's what sustainability is. And then you can apply it across different segments. Climate is a little different. It's unlike any other classification. It is not a category. It is not a technology. It is a physical reality, right? And that physical reality is motivating societies to transition in ways that they haven't done before, at a pace that they haven't done before. Specifically in areas about how we generate our power, how we grow our food, how we move around, and how we build our cities. And these are 4 areas which are also very critical to the emerging consumer to give essential services. And for us at Leapfrog, our investment thesis is built around the emerging consumer. And in our climate investing strategy, we invest in those 4 areas, which is energy, food, mobility, and built environment. And therefore, climate touches everything. It is not separate from a different category. It will affect financial services. It'll affect packaging. It'll affect consumption. It'll affect education. And there are 3 or 4 levels, right? There's a short-term play, there's a medium-term play, and there's a long-term play. And just to end that with climate risks are as conclusive to what smoking is to lung cancer, right? And I want everyone to think about this.
Right, say that again.
Climate risks are as conclusive
Right, okay.
to what smoking is to lung cancer.
So completely a cause.
However, we are doing very little on climate risks. We're trying to do a lot on smoking. Obviously, about 7 million people die of smoking every year. About 8 million people additionally die of air pollution every year. But, you know, and I was talking about this in the morning, it's very difficult for humans to understand long-term implications, right? It's difficult to leave smoking.
And also exponential implications. So it's quite difficult for
absolutely.
human beings to understand the exponential risk that happens when you start to go every degree that the temperature rises.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to understand risks, but it's very easy for us to understand opportunities. And for us, as investors, again, we need to see both sides of the coin. We not only need to understand what are the risks emanating from and therefore what the downside is, but is there an upside? And that's what excites us.
So I snooped around your website, snooped around about what you do, and you talk about a critical idea, which is the green discount. So tell me what that is and how it shapes your investment decisions.
You know, I think throughout the day, a lot of people have spoken about how green technologies are becoming economical. Baroness Scotland mentioned about the might of private capital coming through. You know, morally, all of us agree to a low transition to a low carbon future, right? I mean, there's no debate around that.
Yeah.
But the reason we don't do this is because there's a positive abatement cost. There is a cost that we need to pay, which is more than what we are doing right now. The moment you have a negative abatement cost, it just makes economic sense. And therefore, in certain technologies and products and services, there is a net negative abatement cost, which means while reducing emissions, you're also saving money. Solar energy, wind energy, mobility, specifically on 2- and 3-wheelers. In some cases, 4-wheelers on the commercial side. We're seeing parts of mechanization on the farming side, and we're seeing certain aspects of urbanization element happening. And therefore, there's a very clear transition from a green premium to a green discount. And specifically in emerging markets, if there is a green discount in play, adoption will happen.
Right.
And adoption will happen because growth is tremendous in emerging markets in the next 3 decades. About 50% of GDP growth is going to come from emerging market. Almost every new person added to the population is going to come from emerging markets.
So if this green discount is so big, I mean, I think at one place I read 30 to 40% over carbon alternatives, why are we still so short of the investment levels we need?
Oh, exceptional question. Some of these unlocking has happened recently, right? These technologies have taken decades to come where they are. I'll give you a very simple example. The technology that we use in wind generation or solar generation is not groundbreaking, right? It's not 5 years old. It has been existing for the past 50 years or so. But what is exciting is the grids are in place. The contractual ecosystem is coming into play. The legal system is putting aspects into play about what happens when contractual obligations are not met. And specifically in emerging markets, someone spoke about VUCA, which is how volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous emerging markets is. The other way to look at it is poly risks that always exist. And how do you start addressing some of these poly risks for adoption of those technologies to come through? And then 4 or 5 things have aligned post-COVID. the availability of low-cost technology, but also carrot and stick approach from the governments. The regulations are moving faster than we have seen before. I mean, look at what the US has done with IRA. It changed, it was a switch, and now everything's going to, emerging markets are doing phenomenally well when it comes to applied technology, which means that technology that is working, you bring here and you scale it. So for example, mobility. Two-wheeler and three-wheeler mobility is currently 30% green discount than the ICE alternative it has. With subsidies, it'll become 40%. With battery swapping, it becomes 50%. It's a no-brainer, and it's happening today.
I'm really interested in what we need to do to scale up innovation in, pick your word, the global south, emerging economies. And what can we take from the West that the West got right, the richer countries got right?
Yeah, I think what the richer countries got really right is fundamental R&D. Right? There were dollars, there were universities, there were skills that really developed the technology. They also had a venture program which did large companies, bought them up, scaled them up. Emerging markets don't have R&D dollars. And therefore, what we are seeing is, parallelly that is evolving. But at the same time, the confluence of internationalization or globalization in these green technologies is working phenomenally well. And therefore, if we can take those technologies that are working, bring them to emerging markets, get a green discount in place, and scale them up, that's what innovative business models happen. So on the deep tech innovation, you apply a business model innovation in emerging markets. I'll give you a very simple example, battery swapping. Battery swapping in two- and three-wheelers don't exist in the West. It doesn't exist because of a number of reasons. Because of the dense nature of the cities we have in emerging markets. The electrification in the West has happened top-down, four-wheelers and below, whereas in emerging markets happening bottom-up, two- and three-wheelers. The habits that we have, and that's what is exciting.
Okay. So stay where you are. We're going to bring up three entrepreneurs who are working in these areas that you're talking about, mobility being one of them. We've got the three clean tech entrepreneurs here. Please come up as I just now, so I'll call your names. Co-founder of Planet Electric, Gagan Agrawal. We've also got Kaustubh Padakayana, co-founder of Paisi in India, and Jagmohan Garg, co-founder director of Acacia. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great.
Good. All right. Well, now I didn't tell you that this was going to happen, but what we're going to do here is have a sort of, it's like a mini Shark Tank. It's like the sort of Shark Tank of the Red Sea, right? Shark Tank climate action. So first of all, let's hear from Planet Electric. So mobility, we've got somebody who invests in mobility here. Tell us, first of all, what Planet Electric does.
Sure. So think of us as material science guys who come in and look at four-wheelers, trucks, and see the inefficiency in the V of the EV. We've spoken only about E. What about the V? It has remained the same over 50 years, extremely inefficient. So we come in, we lightweight the chassis, the cabin, the cargo box to 75%, save 50% of the battery, and suddenly this four-wheeler EV is commercially viable.
All right, good. All right, so Nakul, you jump in with any questions that you have. What's your manufacturing plan?
Small steps. Get a 2,000-unit factory up and running next year.
Where?
In Gurgaon, Delhi. We already have the orders. So customers are lapping us up because, of course, we are giving them a discount over the traditional vehicles. We are 20% cheaper than anybody out there in the same category, 1-tonners and 2.5-tonners. And then post that, we'd love to be here in the Middle East with a 20,000-unit plant. Scale up.
And why do you think if you're going to take small steps, the incumbents will not catch up?
The incumbents can definitely catch up, but the incumbents have been sleeping for the last 20 years, to be very honest. The technology for composites is not new. We've seen composites in wind turbine blades. We've seen them in Formula 1 cars. We've seen them in yachts. It's just about engineering that material into the use case. We spoke to about 10 OEMs, and everyone has been, well, we have this legacy investment. Why ruin it? If somebody else comes up, we'll take a look at it. Like, okay, well, we should be the first one.
Let's move on to, so from clean trucks to encouraging more investment in all green technologies. So PISE, I've said that right, haven't I?
Absolutely.
I got it right. Okay, so Kaustubh, what is PISE? Give an example of how you work with your clients.
Absolutely. I think the base for what we do is again set with the whole idea of green discount, right? And what we're trying to essentially do is get corporates who want to transition or look at transitioning to cleaner solutions from carbon alternatives to look at sustainability as a way of investment rather than an expense, right? How do we get them to transition to renewable energy in a way where they don't really look at it as saying, hey, listen, what should I really park a lot of my business and company funds to buy solar panels and install it, right? How do I get that idea of saying, hey, listen, there's a high barrier to entry for me? What we essentially do as a business is we allow investors to come in and finance green projects for organizations, thereby financing 100% of the project cost, leasing it to corporates, making it in a way where, one, the business does not really have to spend any money in setting up, let's say, a rooftop solar plant or electrifying their fleet with their own money, number one. Number two, cuts down on their operational cost by really giving them that green discount benefit directly to them, right? Because if you look at it fundamentally, renewable energy, electric mobility, or even water treatment for that matter, have very high upfront costs. But people don't really find a way to extract value out of the fact that they're operationally cheap, right? Renewable energy, like you rightly mentioned, is about 40-50% cheaper than grid, right? So our model is very simple. We get individuals like you and me to come in with ticket sizes as small as $60, right? To come in and finance small to medium scale projects for organizations. We give it to them on a lease, ensure there's no upfront cost from them, there's immediate savings, and our investors end up making money as a passive source of income from these assets, right? So one, we're making sustainability profitable for investors to look at this as a proper investment asset class. And for organizations, it's a way to really save and go green at the same time.
How do you make it possible or enticing for people to offset their own carbon footprint?
I think for the longest time, products and the way they've been engineered is in a way where sustainability is made to look at as a philanthropic activity, right? And there's an example that I shared in one of the roundtables in the morning as well. The moment we talk about sustainability and going green, the first thing that comes to your mind is that one website that asks you to check out by donating $1 to go plant a tree somewhere, right? It's likely that you look at that entire activity once or twice, and the third time you're like, listen, you know what, I've already done this twice, why would I want to do it again? Now, the only way individual climate action becomes scalable is if you provide a reward that is actually incentivizing the user to do it, and it's investment asset classes like this that actually make sustainability profitable, right? Today on the PISE platform, individuals can track the carbon footprint of their day-to-day activities, right? Everything from the rides that they do on Uber, the orders that they buy from Amazon. We tell you exactly what the carbon footprint is as soon as you complete the activity. And suddenly there's a reason for the guy to invest because he's also making 10% return on that investment, right? So the idea of providing financial returns as a reward incentive over and above the feel-good factor just gives it a reason for people to come back over and over again and making sustainability a default choice, honestly.
Okay, we're going to come on to our final question, then I'll final guest, and I'll leave it to Nakul to give us a wrap it up. So let's turn to Acacia. What's the problem you're solving? And give me a good example for how you're doing it.
Sure. So it's said that measure what is measurable and make measurable what can't be. It's a statement by Galileo. And I believe the first step in managing emissions is to measure your emissions. And there are plethora of activities going on in any kind of asset, like electricity is turned on, ACs are being used, vehicles are dropping off passengers, purchases are happening. So it's imperative for large organizations, sovereign funds, developers, operators in figuring out what exactly is their carbon emissions across their portfolio. So what the problem that we are trying to solve, the number one is we help asset investors, developers, and operators in measuring their carbon emissions and helping them to reduce it using the AI-enabled SaaS platform that we have built. Second, over and above that, take an example of asset investors which has invested, let's say, in Vietnam or India, $1 billion in a portfolio, and say the world goes 2.2 degree warmer in the next 30 years. What kind of value at risk they have? What will be the valuation of the property? So that's another problem that we are working on, where we would like to tell them what kind of climate risk they have.
Any question from you, Nicole, for these two guys? We've got little time.
I'm just excited. I've got so many comments to tell them. But no, this is exciting. There is an intergenerational value migration taking place. And all these three business models are bang in the middle of it. And this is, because we've been doing this for so many years now. I did my first environmental finance deal in the late 90s. But there's a massive global reallocation of capital happening, right? And to your point about value at risk is going to be a big issue. The way you are trying to give a different financial product is going to be interesting. Obviously, there are questions I have around CAC and so many other things is also important. Incumbents will come, will mess with you, but I'm sure you'll figure this out. But there's opportunity to get to the next level, and we have these problems are not going away. In the panels that we spoke before, we only spoke about the extreme side of it. We see massive opportunities, and if we don't capture these opportunities, and if we don't invest in emerging markets, investing in the West is meaningless, because as I mentioned, 50% of GDP growth comes from here, and therefore we will increase our emissions by 5x. But that has to be done on the back of green technologies.
Right.
And that's why companies like these become exciting as we grow.
Right. Well, thank you all, gentlemen, for swimming along with us. Thanks to our entrepreneurs for coming and sharing these ideas. Nice to do business with you, Nicole. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
One quick picture. Come into the middle. I like your socks, by the way. Right. Thank you so much. Right. We have a very special treat for you now. In the lead up to COP, we have a very important contributor to the world's climate discussions. We are coming to that in just a moment. But in the meantime, we've got this for you now.
Hey, everyone.
You will be asking questions and I will be answering you. Is that the way?
We invited some high net worth individuals
Hi.
to know their thoughts on wealth management.
Yeah, perfect.
I don't just want to see my net worth grow. At the end of the day, my investments have to add value to my life.
I believe in making innovative investments, leveraging every opportunity in the market.
It's one thing to create wealth. It's another to sustain it over a long period of time.
My family business making its mark across the globe. That's my singular goal for the future.
For me, it's important to leave a lasting legacy. Something that can nourish my kids, grandkids, and of course, great-grandkids.
I need a solution that has all my financial assets and resources working together in a single comprehensive plan.
With the rapid growth, my financial landscape has evolved dramatically. This requires someone with in-depth knowledge to help me navigate my finances.
Now, sustaining what you have built with your hard work, that's exactly a challenge for my financial advisor.
I need someone who understands the intricacies and the complexities of the global financial world.
My wealth has grown, and so has my understanding of the responsibility that comes with it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here now for a very special person, a very special conversation. We're about to listen to somebody whom I truly admire. And I'll tell you why I truly admire. When you look at politicians anywhere in the world, they quite often get a reputation that they like being in front of the cameras. They may not do too much, but they always like their, being in front of the cameras and taking credit. Bhupender Yadav ji is the exact opposite. You very rarely see him in the spotlight. You very rarely see him in front of the cameras or giving an interview. But anybody who knows anything about India and how India is functioning right now knows the influence, knows his capability, knows the role that he is playing in transforming India. And I have to say that I think not just India, but the world is in many ways lucky that he has given this particular portfolio, environment, climate change. We know that it is one of the most important issues in the world right now. And if there's one person who can navigate the complex discussions, the negotiations, the give and take to actually try and save the planet, well, I at least can't think of anybody better than Bhupender Yadav for that, which is why I was really delighted when he got this particular portfolio. Bhupender Yadav ji, can we welcome you on the stage? So, ladies and gentlemen, Bhupender Yadav, the Honorable Cabinet Minister for the Environment, Forest, Climate Change, Labour and Employment. But Bhupender ji, thank you so much for being here, sir. Can I make sure you've got the mic? Oh, you do that. Yeah. Let me start, sir, with the fact that obviously COP28 is here and there are going to be lots of conversations and discussions. What are you going to be telling everybody at COP?
This is the 28th COP. Sometimes we think that every COP is a final COP and coming with the final conclusion. But it's not to be happen. Because every year world meet together, think together about the future of the world. There is one shloka of Upanishad because in India we are getting a wisdom from Upanishad. It says, Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Vanaktu Sah Viryam Karvavahi Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahi. Let us we all come together, relish together, think together and work together for the prosperity and goodness of the world. That's our object. So here the different countries coming there, academia coming there, even this report on the basis of science is there, policy makers are there, business groups are there, civil society are there. Let us we all come together and we think that where the world is going with the impact of human being, what we will do. And on basis of the three major measures, the mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and along with what individually we can do. So that's a discussion point is there. And definitely in the last COP some decision has already been taken. So it's a platform when we will move forward. One thing I want to clear, because that's a always vision of our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji. Even in this COP also, we assured that under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, India will also the part of solution, not to the part of problem. And that is the main stand and commitment of India.
Right. Well, sir, obviously the goal is a common goal. If the planet is saved, it is a common benefit for the entire planet. But when you look at the commitments that people have made at Paris, at COPs, to say this is what we will do, there's always a time to sort of check who's doing what. There'll be an audit on who's performing. And India's report card in this is actually rather good, the actual work that is being done. What are you going to be sharing on that? And how do you see the others also doing?
Paris Agreement was the milestone in the journey of this COP. And after Paris Agreement, every countries declared their NDCs, National Determined Contribution. And India also declared its NDC. And here, what you are specifically asking me about what is the contribution of India. One thing we achieved under the leadership of our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji in last 9 years, that what India committed in after the Paris Agreement in its first NDC, especially in two areas. First, the reduction of carbon emission intensity, and second, the dependency of India on renewable sources. And here, I am proudly say that under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, we are among the first country in G20 also who achieved its target 9 years before. That's a commitment and able leadership of India that we achieved.
So India's ahead of what the commitments are, but at a macro level, we are still falling short. So there is still reason to be concerned because as a planetary level, at the COP level, we're still not getting to where we would like to be right now.
You see, every country who is giving their national contribution. You know, the national communication which we are going to be filed in this COP also, our third national communication. The national communication prepared by the country on the basis of some points. First, the total capacity of that nation, their greenhouse emission, their mitigation effort, their adaptation effort, their research, initiative, policies, and all these things. We are also going to be submit our third national communication in this COP also. India is the country which is having a total land area of the world, 2.3% land area of the world. But we are having a population of 17%. You compare what is our lifestyle and what is our contribution to that. We have a 17% of population of the world and our carbon emission is 4 to 5%. If you counted the 17% population of developed countries, their carbon emission is 60%. So that is the contribution of India. Even our historical contribution is 5%. Our per capita consumption is less than 1/3 of the world average. That is the contribution of India. Apart from this thing, you will find the other thing also. Because of our development need, our energy resources and energy capacity is increasing. But if you compare to last 9 years, our per capita GDP emission is reduced. So what developmental model India produced under the leadership of Prime Minister, that economic growth with environmental care. That is the model which is India presented here in the world today.
Because quite often, people wonder, here's a country which is still an emerging country. India is not a rich country by any stretch of imagination right now. And as you correctly said, the per capita emissions of India are among the lowest
according to the GDP growth also.
According to GDP. So the per capita emissions are therefore so low that you could argue that India should be allowed to, but this is a change in philosophy now, that India is saying, though our per capita emissions are low, we will still try and control it and cap it because we're caring about it. We'll be trying to...
That's the reason we are enhancing our capacity also. Even you see in the last 9 years, our solar energy capacity increased 25 times. We are depending on our renewable resources are at the 50 times. Our global carbon shrink is 1.97 billion. That is a recorded. We are also caring about, we are taking so much climate action also. After Paris, under the leadership of Prime Minister, India made a collaboration with France, the International Solar Alliance. India made the second climate action program, that is the CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. Then third is the leadership for industry transformation. Number 4, recently Prime Minister also announced in the G20 also, the International Global Fuel Alliance. Then the other, which is the unique for the purpose of saving the biodiversity also, India announced the Big Cat Alliance also. So India in the domestic level, we are doing it better compared to the other countries, and in the international level, we are also part of and taking an initiation for climate action program, which are very relevant and very appropriate for this point.
India has often had a position on common but differentiated responsibility. which is essentially to say that the global north or the developed countries bear the responsibility for the vast amount of carbon which there is in the atmosphere right now. The global south and countries like India do not bear that historical responsibility. And therefore, India's position has been that therefore the global north and the developed